The night they tied my hands to the piano and begged me to cry, the whole town smelled like whiskey, smoke, and fear. Men who had once tipped their hats to me now stood in a circle with hungry eyes. The sheriff was there. 2 ranchers were there. Even the preacher stood near the door, shaking like a weak candle in the wind. They all wanted one thing, my tears, but none of them knew the truth yet. None of them knew that gold had already ruined more lives than it could ever save. And none of them knew what was riding toward our town in the dark. My name is Elira Voss, and this is how the West learned to fear a crying girl. Before we continue, if you are new to my channel, please click on the subscribe button, like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to comment where you are listening from. Let's continue. And it began 3 weeks before that night, in the town of Dry Creek. Dry Creek was not a kind place. It sat under a hard sky where dust never settled and mercy never stayed long. The streets were brown. The windows were cracked. The men were loud. The women were tired. And the saloon was the only place in town that still pretended life could feel warm. That was where I worked, the Rusted Bell Saloon. Every evening I walked down the stairs in a red dress that was not really mine and smiled at men who never asked if I was happy. I carried drinks. I sang soft songs when the piano was in tune. I laughed when I had to. I stepped away when hands got too bold. And I learned how to keep my face calm, even when my heart hurt. I was 19 years old. Most people in Dry Creek thought they knew me. They thought I was just another saloon girl with pretty eyes and a tired smile. They thought I had come from nowhere. They thought I was weak because I spoke gently. That was fine with me. A secret lives longer when people think you are small. "Move faster, Elira," called Madame Sable one hot evening. "Table 3 has been waiting." Madame Sable owned the Rusted Bell. She wore black silk, smelled like roses and smoke, and spoke like every word cost money. Her face was beautiful in a sharp way. Nothing soft lived in her eyes. I lifted the tray and crossed the room. Cards slapped wood. Boots dragged across the floor. Men shouted over each other. The piano played a song too cheerful for that hard room. Lamps glowed gold against the dark wood walls. Outside, the wind pushed dust against the windows, like it wanted to come in. At table 3 sat 3 men I did not trust. One was Sheriff Talon Rusk. He was tall, broad, and always clean, which made him look strange in a town like ours. His badge shined brighter than his heart. His smile was slow and cold, like a wolf showing teeth. He liked control more than justice. Next to him sat Brack Thorne, a rancher with a face like old leather and fingers heavy with rings. He owned half the land around Dry Creek and wanted the other half. He laughed too loud and stared too long. The third man was new. I had not seen him before. He wore a dark coat, though the night was warm. Dust sat on his shoulders from a long ride. His hat was low, but I still saw his eyes when I set down the drinks. Grey eyes, quiet eyes, dangerous eyes. He looked at me once, and I felt something strange. Not safety, not fear, something sharper, unlike the feeling before lightning. Sheriff Rusk lifted his glass. "Elira, sing later." "If Madame Sable asks me to, I will," I said. Brackthorne grinned. "You always talk sweet." "Sweet words earn better tips," I replied. The 2 men laughed, but the stranger did not. He kept looking at me like he was trying to remember my face from somewhere else. I turned to leave. Then Brackthorne caught my wrist. Not hard enough to cause a scene, just hard enough to remind me what kind of man he was. "You hear the rumor?" he asked. My body went still. Dry Creek has many rumors. This one is my favorite. His grin widened. "They say there is gold hidden in this town." Sheriff Rusk chuckled. "Men always smell gold, even when there is none." Brack kept watching me. "Maybe. But some gold ain't buried under dirt." I pulled my wrist free. "Then maybe it is not yours to find." For 1 second, the table went quiet. The stranger's eyes shifted from Brack to me. Then he spoke for the first time. "Let the girl work," he said. His voice was low and calm, but something in it made Brack Thorne's smile crack a little. Brack leaned back. "And who are you?" The stranger picked up his drink. "A traveller." "That's so?" Sheriff Rusk asked. "That is enough for tonight." No one spoke for a breath. Then Brack laughed again, but it sounded forced this time. "Fine. Run along, Songbird." I walked away, but my hands were cold now, because Brack's words had landed too close to the truth. And in Dry Creek, truth was more dangerous than a loaded gun. That night, after the last drunk man stumbled out and the lamps burned low, I cleaned tables in silence. Madame Sable counted coins behind the bar, and the piano sat quiet at last. I thought I had hidden my fear well. I was wrong. "Who was he to you?" Madame Sable asked, without looking up. "Who?" "The grey-eyed rider." "No one." She tied off a money bag. "Men do not speak for women here unless they want something." "Then he wants peace and quiet." Madame Sable smiled faintly. "No man rides into Dry Creek for peace." I said nothing. She looked up then, and her gaze settled on me like a knife resting on skin. "You look pale." "I am tired." "You are scared." Her words were too soft. I kept wiping the table. "Of what?" "That depends," she said. "Of the rumor, or of the man who heard it." I dropped the rag. Just for a second. But Madame Sable saw. She always saw. "I don't know what rumor you mean," I said. She stood and came around the bar. Her heels tapped slowly against the floorboards. "Elira," she said, almost kindly, "I took you in when you had nothing. I fed you, dressed you, kept men from breaking you. Do not lie to me in my own saloon." I looked at her, and for 1 weak second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to lay down the whole heavy secret and be done with it. But secrets like mine never leave quietly, so I forced my face calm again. "I know nothing about hidden gold." Madame Sable studied me. Then she reached up and moved a loose strand of hair from my cheek. The gesture was gentle. Too gentle. "That is good," she whispered, "because a town like this would rip open heaven itself for one bright stone." Then she stepped away. But what happened next stayed with me long after I climbed to my room. When she turned her back, her face changed. Only for a moment. But I saw it. Fear. Madame Sable was afraid. And that scared me more than Brack Thorne ever could. I slept in a little room above the saloon. One narrow bed, one cracked mirror, one washbowl, one wooden chair by the window. From there I could see the street, the stable, and the endless dark beyond town. I locked the door, then sat on the edge of the bed. Under the mattress was a small cloth pouch. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside were 7 gold drops. They were shaped like tears. Not smooth like coins, not sharp like broken metal. Each one looked exactly like a tear caught in sunlight and turned solid. I stared at them until my throat hurt. I had promised myself I would never make more, but promises made in pain are hard to keep in a cruel world. A long time ago when I was little, my mother had held my face in both hands and said, "You must never cry where greedy eyes can see. Never. Gold brings worship first, then chains." Back then, I had not understood. Later, I did. My mother cried gold. So did her mother before her, and now I did too. I did not know why. I only knew the cost. The first time it happened, I was 10 years old and my father had just been buried. My mother cried beside me. One bright gold drop hit the dirt near her boot. A man saw. 3 nights later, our house burned. My mother got me out through the back. She did not make it out herself. That was the night I learned what greed smells like. It smells like smoke. It smells like sweat. It smells like men telling you they are sorry while stealing your life. I pressed the pouch shut and slid it back under the bed. Then I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow. Careful. I stood at once and reached for the little revolver hidden in the washstand drawer. The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 soft knocks, not the banging of a drunk man, not the hard hit of Madame Sable. I said nothing. A voice came through the wood. "It's me," the stranger said. I froze. "How did you find my room?" I asked. "The saloon has 1 stairway." "That is not an answer." A pause. Then, "You looked like you needed warning." I moved closer to the door, but did not open it. "Warning about what?" "Brack Thorn sent a man to follow you after closing." My heart kicked hard once. "Why?" "You know why." The hall went silent again. My fingers tightened on the revolver. "I don't know your name," I said. "Cairn Vale." It fit him. Hard and strange. "What do you want, Cairn Vale?" "To keep you alive." I almost laughed at that. Men usually say that right before they ruin me. I am not most men. "No," I said quietly. "You are not." I do not know why I believed that part. Maybe because his voice held no hunger. Maybe because he had not smiled once. Maybe because lonely people can feel other lonely people, even through a closed door. Still, I did not open it. "You should leave town," he said. "Why would I trust you?" "You shouldn't," he answered. "But you should still leave." "Because of a rumor?" "Because Dry Creek is listening now." A chill slid down my back. "Who told you about the rumor?" I asked. "I hear many things." "That is not an answer either." "No," he said, "it isn't." I waited for more. Instead, he gave me something worse. A clue. "I knew a woman once," he said. "She cried in a mining camp. Men killed each other before sunrise." My breath caught. Was he testing me? Did he know? Or was he speaking blind into the dark? Before I could decide, another sound rose from below. A crash, then a shout, then the crack of glass breaking. Cairn's voice sharpened at once. "Stay inside." Boots hit the stairs fast. Not one man, several. Madame Sable screamed below. A man yelled, "Search every room." My blood turned to ice. They were coming up. "They found something," Cairn said. The hallway exploded with noise. Heavy boots, harsh voices, the sound of doors being kicked open one by one. I looked at the locked door, then at the window, then back at the door. "Why are they here?" I whispered. But deep inside, I already knew. Somebody had talked. Somebody had pointed greedy hands in my direction. And in that moment, with men storming up the stairs and my secret beating inside my chest like a trapped bird, I realized one terrible thing. Dry Creek no longer wanted a saloon girl. It wanted a miracle it could torture. The footsteps stopped outside my room. Then, Brack Thorn's voice came through the wood. "Open up, little songbird," he called. "We just want to see your eyes." And I knew my life had changed forever. Brack Thorn's voice outside my door made my whole body go cold. "Open up, little songbird," he said again. "We just want to see your eyes." Behind my ribs, my heart beat so hard it almost hurt. Cairn Vale moved closer to the door from the hallway. I could hear the shift of his boots on the wood. "Step away from this room," he said. Brack gave a short laugh. "Well now, the traveller has picked a side." I said step away. Another voice joined in. "Sheriff Talon Rusk." "Careful, Cairn," he said. "You don't want to point yourself against the law." "The law?" Cairn asked. "Sounds crowded tonight." One of the men laughed. Another spat on the floor. I backed away from the door and looked around my room. The window, the bed, the washstand, the small pouch still hidden under the mattress. My mind moved fast, but fear kept trying to slow it. Then I heard Madame Sable downstairs. "Don't wreck my whole place," she shouted. "If you fools want the girl, take the girl and be done with it." Her words cut through me sharper than a blade. So that was it. She had sold me. Or maybe she had only stopped protecting me. In Dry Creek, those two things often look the same. Brack hit my door with the side of his boot. The wood shook. "Open," he said, louder now. I pulled the pouch from under my mattress and shoved it into the lining of my dress. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped it. Another kick. The frame groaned. Cairn's voice came again, hard this time. "Last warning." A gun clicked, then another, then another. Too many. For 1 second, the hallway fell silent. The kind of silence that comes right before blood. Then everything broke at once. A gunshot slammed through the hall. Men shouted. Wood cracked. Someone crashed into the wall outside my room. I jumped back as another bullet tore through the door and buried itself in my washstand. I covered my mouth to stop a scream. Outside, boots slammed, fists hit flesh, and guns roared so loud the whole second floor seemed to shake. Then I heard Brack curse. Then Sheriff Rusk barked, "Take him alive." That was all I needed to hear. I ran to the window, pushed it open, and looked down. Bad choice. It was a long drop to the alley below. 2 floors. Broken crates. Hard dirt. One mean-looking horse, tied near the stable. If I jumped wrong, I would break a leg. If I stayed, I would lose more than that. A hand hit my door. Once, twice. The lock split. I turned just as the door flew inward. But it was not Brack. It was Cairn. His dark coat was torn near the shoulder. Blood ran down one sleeve. His grey eyes found mine at once. "Come," he said. I did not argue. He crossed the room in 2 fast steps, grabbed the chair, smashed the rest of the window wide, then looked down once. "Can you climb?" he asked. "Yes. You lie badly." Another shout rose from the hall. Sheriff Rusk again. "He's in there." Cairn grabbed the bed blanket, twisted it hard, and tied one end around the bed frame. Then he threw the rest out the window. "It won't hold long," he said. "Go." "You first," I whispered. "No. If they see you drop, they shoot." I stared at him. He stared back. No smile, no softness. Just that same hard calm. "Go, Elira." I climbed onto the sill. The night wind hit my face. The blanket rope swung against the wall. Below me, the alley looked black and deep. Behind us, boots thundered closer. Cairn lifted his revolver and pointed it at the broken doorway. "Now," he said. So I went. My hands burned at once. My shoes scraped the wall. Dust filled my nose. I slipped halfway down and bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Then my foot found the top of a barrel. I dropped the last few feet and hit the ground hard enough to jar my teeth. Pain shot through my ankle, but it held. Above me, men shouted from my room, "There! Below!" A gun fired. The bullet hit wood near my head. I ran. Not well, not fast, but fear is its own kind of horse. I reached the stable just as Cairn dropped from the window behind me. He landed badly, one knee hitting dirt, but rose at once like pain meant nothing. "Horse," he said. "The grey one?" He nodded. The horse kicked and snorted when I grabbed the reins. Cairn untied it, swung into the saddle, then reached down for me. Another shot cracked through the alley. "Move!" he barked. I took his hand. In one pull, he hauled me up behind him. Then the horse exploded forward. We burst out of the alley into the back road as shouting rose behind us. Men poured from the saloon. Someone pointed. Someone fired. The night split with noise. Dry Creek flew past in pieces. The blacksmith shed. The water trough. Found the little church with the broken crossbeam. Lantern light flashed across faces in windows. The whole town seemed awake now. Everyone knew. Everyone would want a part. The horse thundered past the last fence and into open land. Cold air slapped my face. I held onto Cairn's coat with both hands as the town lights shrank behind us. But what happened next made my stomach drop. A second horse was coming from the east ridge. Fast. Its rider cut across the moonlight like a knife. "Who is that?" I shouted. Cairn looked once and cursed under his breath. Someone worse. The rider fired. The bullet screamed past us. Then came a voice I knew. "Don't let the girl leave." Sheriff Rusk. I turned and saw him clearly now. Hat low, badge flashing, horse foaming at the mouth. Behind him rode 3 more men. We were being hunted. It and Dry Creek had just declared open season on me. Cairn drove his heels into the horse. The animal surged harder across the scrubland. The ground was rough and mean. Brush scratched my skirt. The moon gave just enough light to fear every rock. "You know these trails?" I asked. "Yes." "How?" "I've ridden worse." That told me nothing, but now was not the time. Another shot. Closer. I ducked against his back. "You carry a gun?" he asked. "A small one." "Can you use it?" "Yes." "Can you hit anything?" "No." "That will do." I almost laughed, but fear killed it before it could grow. We cut through a narrow wash, then up toward a line of dark stone hills. Sheriff Rusk and the others stayed behind us, but not far enough. Their horses were strong. Their greed was stronger. At last, Cairn pulled ours behind a cluster of rocks where the trail bent tight and steep. He jumped down. "Off." "What?" "Now." I slid down. My ankle nearly folded under me. Cairn saw it. "Can you run?" "I can try." "Try later." He led the horse between the rocks into a shallow cut hidden by brush. Then he pulled me down beside him. The hoofbeats grew louder. I held my breath so long my chest hurt. Sheriff Rusk rode past first. Then Brack Thorne. Then the others. Brack's voice carried in the dark. "He can't outride us forever." Sheriff Rusk answered. "Spread wide. Check the old mining road. If he reaches the pass, we lose them." Their hoofbeats faded. I sagged against the stone. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then Cairn turned to me. "You hid it well," he said. I went still. "Hid what?" "The truth." My throat tightened. "You still have not told me how much you know." "Enough. That is not enough for me." His gaze stayed on mine. "I know your mother was named Sereth." My blood turned to ice. I stepped back. No one in Dry Creek knew my mother's name. No one. "How do you know that?" I asked. He did not answer right away. That silence frightened me more than if he had drawn a gun. At last he said, "Because I was there the night she died." The world seemed to tilt under me. "No," I whispered. He gave one hard nod. "I was younger, 17. I worked for a supply train outside Red Hollow. I saw the men who set the fire. I saw your mother push you through the back. I saw one gold tear in the dirt." I could not breathe. "You did nothing?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "I was a boy with no gun and too much fear." That answer was honest, and I hated it. "I carried that shame for years," he said. "When I heard a rumor in Dry Creek, I came to see if it was you." I stared at him, trying to match this man with smoke and memory and loss. "You remembered my face?" "No," he said. "I remembered your mother's eyes." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked away. The desert stretched around us, wide and empty and cold. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried. Then I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Who started the rumor?" Cairn's face darkened. "Maybe Brack," he said. "Maybe the sheriff. Maybe Madame Sable. Maybe all 3. My stomach twisted. Madame Sable. I had slept under her roof, worked under her hand, believed her fear meant she might still protect me. Instead, she had fed me to wolves. But none of us knew the full truth yet, and I was about to learn something worse. Cairn reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I took this from Sheriff Rusk during the fight." He handed it to me. In moonlight, I opened it. The writing was rough but clear. "To Talon Rusk. The girl has the gift. I saw gold with my own eyes. Bring her alive. Payment doubles if she cries before delivery. H. Vane." My hand shook. "Who is H. Vane?" Cairn looked toward the dark horizon. Halric Vane, he said. Mine owner, land buyer, grave robber when the price is right. I knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew it. Halric Vane was not just rich. He was the kind of rich that could turn law into a servant and pain into business. He paid them for me? I asked. Yes. For how long? Cairn did not answer. That was answer enough. A cold sickness moved through me. This was bigger than Dry Creek, bigger than a rumor. Bigger than one greedy rancher or one rotten sheriff. Someone had been looking for me, maybe for years, and all the while I had been smiling in a saloon, thinking my secret was sleeping quietly under my own skin. I folded the letter, then I looked at Cairn. If you knew this could happen, I said softly, why did you wait until tonight? He did not flinch. Because I was not sure if saving you would also kill you. I frowned. What does that mean? He looked at the hills, not at me. It means men like Halric Vane do not stop when they lose a trail. The wind rose. Dry grass bent and whispered around us. For one small moment, I let myself feel tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of being careful. Tired of living like my tears were loaded guns. Then anger took the place of fear. I will not be owned, I said. Cairn nodded once. Good. Then we move before dawn. To where? There is an old church near Bitter Ridge. A man there owes me a favor. Can he hide me? Maybe. Maybe. Nothing is safe now. That truth sat between us like a third person. We led the horse through the rocks and started toward the hills on foot to hide our trail. My ankle hurt worse with every step, but I kept moving. The night grew colder. The stars looked sharp enough to cut skin. After a long silence, I asked, if you knew my mother, why never come sooner? Cairn walked beside me, one hand near his gun. Because shame makes cowards wait, he said, and because I thought maybe the world had forgotten. It never forgets gold, I said. No, he replied, it does not. We walked another stretch in silence. Then a thought struck me. I stopped. What if they go back to the saloon? I asked. Ah, they will. My room. Yes. The pouch under my dress lining. I froze. Cairn looked down at me. What? My whole stomach dropped. In the rush from the room, I had changed grips, jumped, fallen, run. My hand flew to my side. The hidden slit in the dress lining was open. Empty. The 7 gold tears were gone. Gone. I looked back toward the black shape of Dry Creek far away under the stars. If someone found those tears, the rumor would become proof. And proof would turn every greedy whisper into a stampede. Cairn saw the answer on my face before I spoke. His voice went flat. You lost them. I could barely make sound. Yes. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the hard calm was back. Then, from somewhere behind us in the hills, a lantern flared to life. Then another. Then another. Not one rider. Many. Too many. Cairn pulled his gun and shoved me behind a rock. They found the trail, he said. And in the cold dark, as lights began to circle us from 3 sides, I understood something terrible. Dry Creek was no longer chasing a rumor. Now it was chasing gold. The lanterns in the hills looked like evil stars. They moved slowly at first, then faster. 1 on the left. 3 on the ridge. 2 more behind the rocks. They were closing around us. Cairn pushed me lower behind the stone. His hand was firm on my shoulder. Do not run yet, he said. Yet, I whispered. He kept watching the lights. When I say run, do not look back. I tried to steady my breathing, but fear had climbed inside my chest and made a home there. How many? I asked. Too many. The horse stamped and pulled at the reins. It could smell the men before I could hear them. And then a voice rang out across the dark. Cairn Vale! Sheriff Talon Rusk, smooth, loud, proud. "Throw down your gun," he called. "You can't ride out of this." Cairn did not answer. Another voice came next. "Brackthorn, give us the girl, and maybe I let you keep breathing." I shut my eyes for 1 second. They were talking about me like I was meat on a butcher's block. Then something else happened. A third voice rose from the dark. It was a woman, Madame Sable. "Elira," she shouted. "Come out, child. You know these men will tear this whole hill apart." Her voice struck deeper than the men's threats. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Madame Sable had come herself, not because she cared, because she wanted to collect what she had sold. Cairn leaned close to my ear. "The woman on the right ridge. Lantern low. Yet that is your chance." "What chance?" "She is the weakest point." I looked where he looked. One rider, small, nervous, holding position too far from the others. "You want us to break through there? I want you to survive." Sheriff Rusk called again. "This ends one of 2 ways, girl. Either you walk down or we drag you." Brack laughed. "Maybe she'll cry on the way." A few of the men laughed with him. That laugh did something to me. Not fear. Not this time. Anger, hot and sharp. They wanted my tears. They wanted me broken enough to make them rich. They wanted my pain to shine in their hands. I looked at Cairn. If they catch me, they won't stop. No. If I cry, more will come. Yes. Then I would rather die first. His grey eyes met mine. Something changed in his face then. Something heavy. Something human. "Not tonight," he said. Then he stood up and fired. The first shot hit a lantern. Glass burst. Fire dropped into the dirt. Men shouted. The second shot took a hat off someone's head. The hills exploded with noise. "Run!" Cairn shouted. I ran. We bolted from behind the rocks and cut hard right toward the weak point. Bullets cracked behind us. Dirt kicked up near my boots. The horse screamed when a shot grazed past it, then charged with us into the dark. The rider on the right ridge panicked and raised a gun too late. Cairn fired once. The gun flew from the rider's hand. I did not stop to see more. We broke through. For one wild moment, I thought we had done it. Then a rope flew from the dark and caught my waist. I screamed as it tightened and yanked me sideways. My feet left the ground. I slammed hard into the dirt, and rocks tore through my sleeves. "Elira!" Cairn shouted. I rolled, choking on dust, clawing at the rope. A rider dragged me across the ground for 3 brutal seconds before Cairn's gun boomed again. The horse pulling me cried out and stumbled. The rope went slack. I ripped it off and tried to stand, but pain shot through my ankle so hard I nearly blacked out. Cairn was beside me at once. He pulled me up under one arm. "Move!" I limped with him as bullets flew around us like angry bees. Then Madame Sable's voice cut through the dark again. "Don't shoot her face!" she screamed. "Halric pays double for beauty." My whole body went still for a heartbeat. That was the truth. Not protection, not kindness, not fear. Price. I had only ever been price to her. Cairn pulled me forward, but I twisted back long enough to look. I saw her in the lantern light. Black dress, a straight back, one hand gripping the reins, eyes bright with greed. She saw me too, and she smiled. Not kindly, not sadly. Like a woman looking at something she had always believed belonged to her. We reached a narrow cut between 2 rocks. Cairn shoved me through first, then followed. Bullets struck stone around us and sent sharp chips into the air. For a few breaths, the gunfire eased. We stumbled into a small ravine, hidden by brush and shadow. Cairn pushed me down behind a fallen log. "Stay here." "What are you doing?" "Buying time." Before I could stop him, he moved back toward the opening with his revolver ready. I grabbed his coat. "Don't," I said. He looked down at my hand, then at my face. If I don't, they cage you before sunrise. His voice was hard, but his eyes were not. That made it worse. I am tired of men bleeding for me, I whispered. He knelt in front of me. The shooting outside had grown distant for 1 second, as if even the night was listening. You think this is for gold? He asked. I looked at him and said nothing. He gave one bitter shake of his head. Then you still do not see what I came back for. Those words hit me deep, too deep, because I had no safe place inside me left for hope. Before I could answer, voices rose close again. They went into the wash. Spread out. Watch the ridge. Cairn stood at once, but this time I stood too. I pulled out my little revolver. His eyes dropped to it. Can you hit anything now? I swallowed. Maybe hate helps aim. One corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, just something near it. That will do. We waited. The ravine felt small now, tight, breathing. The air smelled of dirt, horse sweat, and powder smoke. Then footsteps slid over stone above us. One man, then another. A shadow moved on the ridgeline. Brack Thorn. I knew his shape even in the dark. He peered down into the wash. Pretty little thing, he called softly. Come out, and I'll keep the others from tearing you apart. I raised my gun with shaking hands. Cairn touched my arm once, steady. Brack took another step. I know you can hear me, he said. You think Cairn can save you? That man is half ghost and half regret. Cairn's jaw tightened. Brack kept coming. Then he said the one thing that made my blood turn to fire. Your mother begged sweeter than you do. The world narrowed. I fired. The shot cracked through the ravine. Brack shouted and fell backward. I did not know if I hit him badly. I only knew I had hit him enough to hear real pain in his voice. Men yelled above us. Cairn looked at me once. Good. Then all hell broke loose again. Shots poured into the wash. We ran deeper through the ravine as dirt sprayed and stones split. The path twisted, dropped, and narrowed until the walls almost touched our shoulders. At last, it opened into a hidden pocket of land. There, half buried by time and sand, stood the remains of an old miner's shack. Its roof sagged. One wall leaned, but it was shelter. We rushed inside. Cairn barred the door with a broken beam and checked the back wall. No rear exit. Good or bad? I asked. Depends who wants in. Outside, voices moved past us, then away, then close again. They had lost sight, but not the hunt. Inside the shack, the dark pressed tight. Moonlight came through cracks in the boards. A broken table lay in one corner. A rusted stove sat dead and cold near the wall. I slid down to the floor because my ankle could no longer pretend. Pain throbbed all the way up my leg. Cairn crouched beside me and reached for my boot. I jerked back. What are you doing? Seeing if it is broken. You are very calm for a man being hunted. I panic only after. I almost laughed. Almost. He removed the boot carefully. My ankle had swollen fast. He touched the side of it. Pain shot through me and I hissed. Not broken, he said. Bad twist. That feels like bad news. It is survivable. Outside, a horse snorted near the shack. We both froze. Then the hoofbeats moved on. I let out a shaky breath. Cairn sat back on his heels. In the thin moonlight, I could see the blood on his sleeve more clearly now, and the wound near his shoulder had soaked through his coat. You were shot, I said. Scraped. That is still shot. He ignored that. I did not. Sit down, I told him. He looked at me like he had forgotten I could give orders. I am fine. No, I said. You are leaking. For the first time that night, I heard a very small sound from him that might have been a laugh. He sat. I tore a strip from the inside of my skirt and wet it with the little water from my flask. Then I cleaned the wound as best I could. He did not complain once. That bothered me more than if he had screamed. Men who feel nothing are dangerous. Men who feel too much and hide it are worse. You came back because of guilt, I said quietly, as I tied the cloth around his shoulder. Yes. That is not all. No. I stopped tying and looked at him. Then what is it? He held my gaze a long time, long enough to make my pulse stumble. At Red Hollow, he said, after the fire, I found something near the back fence. What? He reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out a small silver charm on a black cord. My breath left me. It was my mother's, a little silver tear. She had worn it every day. I touched it with trembling fingers. I kept it, he said, to remember what fear cost me. I could not speak for a moment. Then I asked, why show me now? Because tonight may not leave room for later. Those words sat in the dark between us. Heavy, soft, dangerous in a different way. Then something outside scraped against the wall. We both turned. A shadow passed the crack in the boards. Then a voice, low and trembling. Elira. I knew that voice. Not Madame Sable. Not Brack. Not Sheriff Rusk. This one belonged to the young piano player from the saloon, Tavian Quill. He was thin, quiet, and always smelled of tobacco and lemon oil from the piano keys. He never bothered the girls, never stared too long, never asked rude questions. I moved toward the door. Cairn caught my wrist. Wait! Elira, Tavian whispered again. Please, I came alone. How do you know we're here? Cairn asked through the wood. Silence. Then Tavian answered, because I heard them talk, and because Madame Sable made a deal. My stomach turned. What deal? I asked. Tavian's voice shook. She sent word to Halric Vane before the search even started. She had proof already. Every muscle in my body went tight. What proof? I asked. He answered at once. The gold tears, Elira. She found them in your room. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. Of course. But Tavian was not finished. And that is not the worst part, he said. I opened the door just enough to see his face. He looked terrified. Sweat shone on his forehead. His lip trembled. What do you mean? I asked. Tavian looked behind him once, then back at me. Halric Vane is riding here himself, he whispered. He will be in Dry Creek by sunrise. Cairn stood slowly behind me. The air inside the shack changed, got colder, sharper, because men like Brack Thorn were greedy. Men like Sheriff Rusk were corrupt. Men like Madame Sable were cruel. But Halric Vane was something worse. He did not just take gold. He built empires out of human suffering. Then Tavian said the one thing that made the night feel even darker. He says he does not want you dead, Tavian whispered. He wants you heartbroken. I stared at him. Why? Tavian's face turned pale. Because, he said, he believes sorrow makes the purest gold. And somewhere out in the dark, beyond the ravine and the riders and the hard black hills, a train whistle cried across the night. Halric Vane had entered the valley. By the time the train whistle died, even the wind sounded afraid. No one in the shack spoke for a few seconds. Tavian stood outside the half-open door, breathing hard, like he had ridden through hell just to bring the warning. Cairn stood behind me, still and sharp, one hand near his gun. I held my mother's silver tear in my palm so tightly it pressed a mark into my skin. Halric Vane was here, not near, not coming soon. Here. And that changed everything. Get inside, Cairn told Tavian. Tavian slipped in at once. Cairn shut the door again and dropped the wooden beam back into place. The little shack felt even smaller now. 4 breathing people. Too much fear. Not enough air. Tavian looked at me with red, frightened eyes. I am sorry, Elira. For what? I asked. His face twisted. For hearing things and saying nothing before. For knowing Madame Sable had been asking questions. for seeing Sheriff Rusk count money behind the bar last week. I knew something ugly was growing. I just did not think it was this. That is how evil likes to arrive, I said softly. It comes one ugly piece at a time. Tavian dropped his gaze. Cairn stepped closer. How many men came with Vane? I did not count all of them. Maybe 12, maybe more. Some rode in from the South Trail. Others came by wagon. He brought armed men, not ranch hands. We hard men. Mine guards, Cairn muttered. Tavian nodded. I had never seen Halric Vane with my own eyes, but I had heard enough. Mine guards were not paid to protect life. They were paid to protect ownership, land, silver, gold, men, women, anything powerful enough to make money. And now they had come for me. Tavian swallowed. Madame Sable gave him the 7 gold tiers. My stomach twisted. She handed them over herself? Yes. The words hurt more than I expected. Maybe because part of me, a foolish little part, had still hoped she had only surrendered to fear. That maybe she had been cornered, forced, broken. But no. She had handed my pain to a monster-like payment. What did he say when he saw them? I asked. Tavian shivered. He smiled. I looked away. That answer was enough. Outside, a rider moved somewhere along the ridge. We heard the soft sound of hooves on stone. Then silence again. They were still looking, still circling, waiting for dawn maybe, or waiting for us to make one mistake. Cairn crouched by the broken table and spread the folded letter from Sheriff Rusk flat against it. Then he looked at Tavian. You said Sable made a deal. Tell me all of it. Tavian licked dry lips. I was cleaning the piano room after closing 2 nights ago. The door to Madame's office was open a crack. She was speaking to Sheriff Rusk. She said, I kept the girl safe long enough. I want what I was promised. Then the sheriff said Vane would pay once he had living proof. Tavian looked at me. I think she had been watching you for months. I shut my eyes. Months. Every smile, every question, every soft touch. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. She suspected, Cairn said. Tavian nodded. Then tonight, she found proof. I opened my eyes again. How? Tavian looked miserable. When they searched your room, she lifted your mattress. Then she found 1 gold tier caught in the torn cloth of your dress near the bed. Not one of the 7, a tiny one. Maybe older, maybe dropped before. My blood went cold. So it had happened before. 1 unnoticed tear, 1 forgotten sign, 1 buried mistake. That was how the whole trap had begun. Not with thunder, not with a confession. Just 1 small gold drop hiding in cloth. None of us knew the full truth when the night started. Now it was arriving piece by piece, each one worse than the last. Cairn leaned over the table. If Vane is in the valley by now, he will lock down every road by morning. Tavian nodded. He already has men on the East Trail. And the Old Bridge Road. What about Bitter Ridge Church? I asked. Cairn's face darkened. Tavian answered first. Gone. My heart sank. What do you mean, gone? Sheriff Rusk sent men there before midnight. Said a rider might be taking refuge. So even that small hope had been crushed before we could reach it. Cairn straightened slowly. Then the church favor is dead. Unless the man there escaped, Tavian said. Cairn shook his head. He would not abandon the place. That told me enough. Another person had likely been dragged into this because of me. The shame of that sat heavy on my chest. I ruin every place I stop, I whispered. Cairn turned to me at once. No. Yes. This was built long before you. His tone was sharp now, almost angry. I looked up at him. Men burn, men die. Our towns turn into traps. Because greedy men choose evil, he said. Not because you exist. The words landed deep. So deep I could not answer. Sometimes a kind sentence hurts more than a cruel one, because it reaches the place inside you that still wants to believe life is not all punishment. Tavian moved closer to the door crack and listened. They are spreading wider. I think they want to keep us boxed in until sunrise. Then we move before first light, Cairn said. To where? I asked. He looked at me, then at the silver charm in my hand. There is one place Vane will not expect. I frowned. Where? He held my gaze. Red Hollow. The name hit like a gunshot inside my chest. The place where my mother died. The place where my life broke open. No, I said at once. It is abandoned. No. It has mine tunnels, cellars. I rock cover. I said no. Cairn was quiet for one breath. And I heard you. Tavian looked between us. What is Red Hollow? A grave, wearing a town's old bones, Cairn said. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the silver charm. I could smell smoke in memory, hear my mother coughing, feel her hand pushing me through darkness. No, I said again, softer now. I cannot go back there. You may have to, Cairn replied. That made anger rise in me again. You speak like roads choose themselves. They do when armed men close the others. The truth of it stung. I turned away from both of them. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing and the wind through the cracks. Then Tavian said something small and frightened. There is one more thing. Neither of us answered, so he went on. The Halric Vane is not only after gold. Cairn's eyes narrowed. Explain. Tavian looked at me like he hated the words before speaking them. Madame Sable told him the girl cries only under true pain, not fake pain, not fear alone. She said sorrow works better, loss works best. The room seemed to shrink. I felt sick. Tavian swallowed. Vane said then we remove hope first. Cairn went very still. I did too, because now we understood the shape of the hunt. It was not enough for Halric Vane to capture me. He wanted to break me in the right way, slowly, carefully, until gold fell like rain. The monster did not want my death. He wanted my despair. What did Sable say to that? I asked. Tavian's face dropped. She said she knew what would hurt you most. My mouth went dry. Cairn took one step toward Tavian. Did she say what? No. Sheriff Rusk walked in just then. But it was enough. Madame Sable knew something. Maybe about my mother. Maybe about my past. Maybe about Cairn. Maybe about all of it. A clue had just opened, but not the whole truth. Curiosity and fear twisted together inside me. What did she know? And how long had she known it? A sharp sound cut through my thoughts. A whistle. Close. Outside the shack. Cairn moved at once, blew out the little lamp Tavian had lit, and shoved us both down behind the wall. Moonlight now came only in thin silver lines through the boards. We listened. Footsteps in dirt, one pair only. Slow, careful. Then a voice came through the wall. Not loud, not threatening. Calm. I know you are in there. Even before Cairn's jaw hardened, I knew who it was. Halric Vane. I had never heard his voice before. But evil has a way of sounding certain. No fear, no rush, only ownership. Tavian began to tremble. Cairn raised his gun. I touched his wrist. Wait. The voice outside came again. Elira Voss, he said. I would rather meet as civilized people than drag this into ugliness. I hated how smooth he sounded. Like a banker, like a man offering tea, not like someone who bought pain. Cairn whispered, do not answer, but I did. What do you want? I called. A pause. Then, your suffering is valuable. I prefer not to waste it. My stomach turned. Tavian shut his eyes. Halric continued. You have been lied to your whole life, hidden away, used by lesser people. I can offer structure, protection, a future worthy of what you are. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the lie was so large it looked stupid in moonlight. You mean a cage, I said. A cage keeps wolves out. No, I replied, it keeps prey in. Silence. Then he chuckled softly outside. The sound chilled me more than shouting would have. You have your mother's tongue, he said. My whole body went rigid. Cairn looked at me fast. Tavian stared. I spoke before fear could stop me. You knew my mother? Oh yes, Halric said through the wall. Very well. The room tilted. That one answer opened a dark door in my mind. Too many pieces suddenly leaned toward each other. Red Hollow? My mother? Halric Vane? The fire? No, surely not. I forced words through my throat. How? Another pause. Longer now. Enjoying itself. Then he said, I was the man she refused. I could not breathe. Cairn swore under his breath. Outside, Halric's boots shifted on the dirt. She could have lived beautifully, he went on. Instead, she chose fear and running. Pride is expensive. You are learning that now. My hands shook so hard I had to grip the floorboards. He had known her, wanted her, been refused by her. And then Red Hollow burned. The clue in the middle of the story had turned into something uglier than I imagined. Not random greed, not only rumor, something older, something personal. You burned Red Hollow, I whispered. The wind moved outside. For 1 second, he did not answer. Then he said, with terrible calm, I corrected disobedience. Tavian made a broken sound beside me. Cairn's face changed into something I had not seen before. Pure murder. He stood up so fast, the boards creaked. I grabbed for him, but too late. He kicked the beam from the door and stepped into the moonlight with his gun raised. Vala, no, I shouted. The night exploded. Shots roared. Men hidden in the dark fired from both sides of the shack. It had been a trap. Halric had not come alone. He had come close, just to pull us out. Cairn fired twice and dragged himself behind a rain barrel as bullets tore through the doorway. Tavian screamed and covered his head. I dropped low, then crawled toward the broken sidewall where the boards were weakest. Backside, Cairn shouted. Move! I slammed my shoulder against the rotten wood. Once, twice. The third hit broke it enough for cold air to rush in. Through here, I yelled. Tavian crawled first, sobbing with fear. I followed, pain blazing through my ankle. Cairn came last, firing one-handed behind him as we spilled into a narrow ditch at the back of the shack. Then flames rose. They had set the front wall on fire. Orange light climbed the night. Smoke rolled upward. For one terrible heartbeat, I was a child again, staring at another burning place. My knees gave. Cairn seized my arm. Not now. I forced myself up. We ran bent low through brush and thorn, the burning shack behind us, throwing ugly gold light across the ravine. Men shouted from both sides. Horses moved. Orders snapped through the dark. Halric Vane did not shout. He only called one sentence after us, calm as ever. She will cry before morning. That promise followed us like a curse. We climbed out of the ditch and into a field of jagged stone. Tavian stumbled ahead. Cairn kept close behind me. Smoke drifted after us. Then a bullet struck the ground near Tavian's feet. He cried out and fell. I dropped beside him. Tavian! His eyes were wide with shock. Blood spread across his side. Not a killing hit, but bad. Very bad. Cairn knelt and pressed his hand against the wound. Can you stand? Tavian tried. Failed. No, he gasped. More riders were coming. Their lanterns flashed through the brush below. We had seconds, maybe less. Cairn looked around once, measuring distance, stone cover, the rise ahead, the men below. Then he made the choice before I was ready. He pulled a small knife from his boot, grabbed my hand, and cut a shallow line across his own palm. I jerked back. "What are you doing?" He pressed the bloody hand against mine and closed my fingers around something metal, a small brass key. Old, cold. "Listen to me," he said. "No. Illyra, listen." Something in his voice made the world stop. "There is a locked iron box under the altar in Red Hollow Chapel," he said. "This key opens it." I stared at him. "Ugh, what is in it?" His face looked grim in the firelight. "The truth your mother died protecting." Riders shouted below. Tavian groaned beside us. My heart slammed against my ribs. Cairn rose and pulled his gun again. "What truth?" I asked. He looked back at me once, only once. And what he said next changed everything. "You were never just born with golden tears," he said. "You were chosen for them." Then he turned toward the rising riders and opened fire, while I sat frozen in the dark, with the key in my hand and a truth too big to understand. Cairn's gunfire cracked through the dark like breaking bones. I could still hear it as I dragged Tavian behind a ridge of broken stone. My ankle screamed with every step. Tavian could barely breathe. Blood kept soaking through his shirt. Behind us, riders shouted, horses kicked. And bullets snapped through the night air. Cairn was still down there, still holding them back, and in my hand was a small brass key and a truth too large for my heart. You were never just born with golden tears. You were chosen for them. Those words would not leave me. "Move," Tavian gasped. I looked at him. His face had gone pale as candle wax. "You need rest." "No," he whispered. "You need the chapel." So we kept going. The road to Red Hollow was barely a road anymore. It was a dead trail through dry brush, fallen fencing, and old wagon ruts that led nowhere good. The moon gave us enough light to fear everything. Broken roofs rose in the distance like crooked teeth. Wind moved through empty buildings with a low, sad sound. Red Hollow. The place my mother died. The place Hulrich Vane had burned. And the place I had spent years trying not to remember. When we finally reached the old chapel, it stood at the edge of town like the last tired witness. Half the bell tower had fallen. One wall leaned. The front doors were gone. But the stone altar still sat inside under a cracked wooden cross. We slipped in. Dust floated in the moonlight. The air smelled old, dry, bitter. Tavian fell to one knee. I rushed to him. "Stay with me." He gave a weak nod, but his eyes were glassy now. I turned to the altar. Under it, just like Cairn had said, was a small iron door set into the stone floor. Rust had bitten deep into the edges. I knelt, hands shaking, and pushed the brass key into the lock. For one terrible second, it would not turn. Then it did. The click sounded louder than a gunshot. I opened the iron door. Inside was a metal box wrapped in old cloth. I lifted it out and set it on the altar. My fingers shook so badly I had to stop twice before I could untie the cloth. Then I opened the lid. Inside were three things: a letter, a thin ledger book, and my mother's scarf, folded so neatly that it almost stole the breath from me. I touched the scarf first. It still carried no smell now. Time had taken that, but my hands remembered it anyway. Under the scarf lay the letter. My name was written on it. For Illyra. I opened it. The handwriting was my mother's, and just like that, the years between us broke apart. My Illyra. If you are reading this, then the wolves found our trail after all. I prayed they never would. I prayed you would grow old, never knowing what kind of men chased us. You must know the truth now. The gold tears are real. But they are not a prize from heaven. They are a burden carried by women in my line, but not every daughter receives them. They pass only by choice. Love chooses, not blood alone. My heart stopped. I read the line again. They pass only by choice. Love chooses, not blood alone. So Cairn was right. I had not only inherited them, my mother had chosen me for them. My hands trembled harder as I kept reading. When you were a baby, fever took hold of you. You burned for 3 days. Neva, the old healer, told me there was one way to save you. I could pass the gift to you. It would cool your body and spare your life. But once given, it could not be called back. Tears filled my eyes, but I forced them back. Not now. Not for them. Not for gold. I kept reading. I hated the choice. I hated myself for making it. But I loved you more than I feared the burden. So I chose you. I chose your life. If this letter reaches you, then forgive me if you can. I pressed my hand over my mouth. My mother had not cursed me because she was cruel. She had saved me. Saved me with the very thing that ruined her. The letter continued. Halric Vane learned my secret when I was still young. He wanted to own it. First he brought flowers, then promises, then threats. When I refused him, he bought men. He bought the law. He bought fire. Red Hollow did not burn by chance. It burned because one man could not bear the word no. My whole body went cold. There it was. Plain as daylight. Not rumor, not guessing. Truth. My mother had written it herself. I read faster now. If he ever comes for you, trust no bargain. Trust no cage dressed as protection. Men who feed on sorrow never stop when they are full. In the ledger are the names of the men he paid, the land he stole, and the sheriff who helped him. I copied everything before I ran. If I die, let truth outlive me. I looked at the ledger, then back at the letter. There was one final part, and one more thing, my child. Gold tears come from pain. Yes, but greed believes pain is all they are. Greed is wrong. The purest tear does not come from despair. It comes from love that refuses to die. If the day comes when they try to own your grief, remember that. Do not let them teach your heart what your tears mean. My vision blurred. I could barely see the last line. I chose you because I loved you. So choose yourself the same way. I lowered the letter slowly. For one moment, I could not move. Not because I was weak, because the truth was too big. All my life, I had believed I was a curse walking around in a dress, but my mother had not handed me this gift because she wanted gold. She had done it because I was dying. She had chosen my life. That changed everything. Then Tavian made a broken sound behind me. I spun around. He had collapsed against the chapel bench, one hand pressing his wound. I rushed to him with the scarf in my hand and pressed it hard against his side. Tavian, stay with me. He tried to smile. You always told me to play softer when you sang. I almost laughed, almost. Then listen to me now, I said. You are not dying in a dead chapel. But what happened next changed everything again. Boots, outside, many of them. Then Halric Vane's voice. So this is where the ghosts brought you. I froze. Our lantern light spilled across the chapel doorway. Halric stepped in first. He was older than I had imagined. Tall, clean, silver at the temples, black coat, gloves. He looked like a banker who had learned how to smile over graves. Behind him came Sheriff Talon Rusk, Brack Thorn, Madam Sable, and 3 armed mine guards. Then 2 more men dragged someone in. Cairn. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen, hands tied behind his back. My heart stopped so hard it hurt. Halric saw my face and smiled. There, he said softly. That is the look of real sorrow. I forced my hands steady. Cairn lifted his head just enough to meet my eyes. He was alive. That was all I needed to know. Halric's gaze moved to the altar. The box, he said. Good. You saved me the trouble. I stood in front of it. No. His smile thinned. I did not ask. Sheriff Rusk took 1 step forward, but Halric lifted a hand. He wanted this himself. Of course he did. Men like him always do. Brackthorne grinned at me. You can stop shaking, little songbird. We ain't gonna kill you. Madame Sable laughed softly. Not unless you stop being useful. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw something under her painted calm. Not strength, not elegance, only hunger. A woman who had sold every piece of her soul and still wanted more. You fed him my tears, I said. She tilted her head. And you fed me hope, child. We all trade what we have. No, I said quietly. Some of us only sell what was never theirs. That hit her. I saw it. Only for a second. But I saw it. Halric stepped closer. Enough. He looked at me like I was already an object in one of his ledgers. You can make this simple, he said. Come with me. No more running. No more dying boys. No more wounded heroes. He touched Cairn's shoulder with the toe of his boot. Cairn stayed on his knees. My hand shook. Halric saw. Good. Let him think he knew why. You want me heartbroken, I said. I want truth, he replied. No, I said. You want profit. He smiled again. Profit is only truth with numbers. I hated him so much in that moment that my whole body felt made of flame. But then I remembered my mother's words. Greed is wrong. The purest tear does not come from despair. It comes from love that refuses to die. And something inside me became very still, very clear. I looked at Cairn, then Tavian, then the letter in my hand, then the ledger on the altar. And suddenly I knew how this ended. Not with begging, not with surrender, with truth. You want the box? I asked Halric. Yes. You want my tears? Yes. You want everyone here to see what you own? A strange light entered his eyes. Very much. I nodded slowly. Then I lifted the ledger high. This says you burned Red Hollow, I said, loud enough for everyone in the chapel to hear. It says you paid Sheriff Rusk. It says Brackthorne took land from families after the fire. It says Madame Sable sold women's names for money. It says all of you fed on ruin. Sheriff Rusk's face changed first. Give me that, he snapped. Brackthorne swore. Madame Sable went pale. Only Halric stayed calm. Old paper proves little, he said. Then my mother's letter proves more, I replied, and lifted that too. Halric's eyes sharpened. So now I knew what frightened him. Not my tears, the truth. I opened the letter and read aloud. I read the part where my mother named him. I read the part where she wrote that Red Hollow burned because one man could not bear the word no. I read the part where she called him a buyer of law and a maker of fire. When I finished, silence filled the chapel. Then Brackthorne turned on Halric. You told us it was a business matter, he said. You never said the whole town fire came from some woman turning you down. Sheriff Rusk looked just as sick. Madame Sable stared at Halric, and for the first time in the story, I saw fear in her too. Not fear for me, fear for herself. Because monsters turn on servants when servants know too much. Halric saw the room changing and did what evil men always do when control slips. He pulled his gun and shot Brackthorne in the chest. The sound blasted through the chapel. Brack fell without even finishing his curse. Madame Sable screamed. Sheriff Rusk raised his own gun at once. Everything shattered. Cairn moved. Fast, faster than an injured man should move. He drove his shoulder into the guard beside him, stole the man's revolver, and fired once into the lantern hanging by the old beam above the altar. Flame burst. The dry chapel wood caught at once. Tavian shouted. The guards opened fire. Sheriff Rusk shot at Halric. Halric shot back. Madame Sable ran for the ledger. Even now, even with fire rising, even with death all around, she still wanted the paper that might buy her one more bargain. I kicked the ledger toward Cairn instead. He caught it. Then Halric lunged for me. I stumbled backward as his gloved hand caught my arm. "There you are," he whispered. His grip was iron. His eyes were bright with madness. "Cry for me." I looked at him, at the man who burned my mother's town, at the man who hunted me like an animal, at the man who thought pain belonged to him, and I felt it then. Not despair, not helplessness, love. For my mother, for the life she chose for me, for Cairn bleeding and still fighting, for Tavian trembling and still warning me, for myself, for the girl who had survived long enough to stand here. A tear filled my eye. Halric smiled. Then it fell. A real gold tear struck the chapel floor between us. Every eye in the room snapped toward it. That 1 second saved me. Halric bent for it. So did Madame Sable. Sheriff Rusk turned too. Even dying, Brack reached with bloody fingers. My greed pulled them all lower than bullets ever could. Cairn shouted, "Elira!" I wrenched free. At that same moment, Halric grabbed the gold tear, and the burning beam above the altar cracked loose. It fell hard across him, Sheriff Rusk, and Madame Sable together. The floor beneath the altar gave way with it. Old mine rot, old fire damage, old sins at last opening their mouth. The boards collapsed. All three dropped screaming into the black shaft below. The gold tear went with them. Then fire leaped across the chapel. Cairn grabbed my hand. "Tavian!" We pulled him up between us and ran as the whole front of the chapel began to fall in behind us. Heat slammed into our backs. Smoke chased us through the doorway. We stumbled into the open dirt just as the bell tower gave one last sad groan and crashed through the roof. The night shook, and then silence. Only fire remained. I stood there breathing hard. Tavian leaning against one side of me, Cairn on the other. Red Hollow burned again. But this time it was swallowing the right people. Sheriff Rusk never climbed out. Madame Sable never climbed out. And Halric Vane, the man who wanted my sorrow to make him rich, vanished into the dark he had dug for others. By sunrise, the mine guards had fled. Brack Thorn died by the chapel door. And the ledger, blackened at the edges but still readable, remained in Cairn's hand. That was enough. Enough for nearby towns. Enough for the territorial court. Enough for every stolen widow, burned family, and cheated ranch hand who had waited years for a reason to speak. Truth, once lit, moves faster than fire. 3 days later, we buried my mother's letter beside the chapel ruins under a stone cairn built with his own hands. Tavian lived. Barely, but he lived. He said he would never play piano in another saloon again. I told him that was the first smart thing he had done in months. He laughed, weakly. But he laughed. Then it was just me and Cairn by the ruins. Morning light lay soft over the broken land. I held the silver tear charm in one hand. In the other, I held the last gold tear I would ever keep. Not for selling, not for fear, for memory. Cairn stood beside me, hat in hand, wind moving through his dark hair. "You can still ride away from me," he said. I looked at him. "Is that what you want?" "No." The answer came fast, honest, warm. I stepped closer. "All my life," I said, men wanted me crying. His eyes stayed on mine. "I know, but you did not." "No," he said quietly. "I wanted you free. That did it. Not like thunder, not like gunfire, just one clean truth reaching the place inside me that had been hurt for too long." I rose onto my toes and kissed him. Soft, slow, real. When I pulled back, his forehead touched mine. And for the first time in years, I did not feel hunted. I felt chosen. By my mother's love. By my own survival. By the future still waiting for me. I looked down at the last gold tear in my palm. Then I buried it in the dirt beside the stone cairn. The West could keep its greed. My sorrow was no longer for sale, and after that, no one ever again begged Elira Voss to cry.